Ողջունում եմ բոլորիդ։ Այսօրվա ինքնաճանաչման եթերում մենք հյուրեր ունենք Արապապյան, ժողովրդավարական բևեռի խորհրդի անդամ, Էլիաս Գերասոլիս, մեր հայտնի Livingston Group-ի անդամ, որը օգնում է մեզ այս Վաշինգտոնում լսումներ անցկացնելու պահով։ Մեր զրույցի մնացած մասը մենք կիրականացնենք անգլերենով, որովհետև մեր հյուրին այդպես է հարմար։ Խնդրում եմ ներողամիտ եղեք, հուսով եմ մենք տարբերակ կունենանք հետագայում սա թարգմանելու եւ ով չի հասկանա հայերեն, մենք անպայման կարևոր ինֆորմացիան կտարածենք այստեղից նաեւ հայերեն. So, hello, gentlemen. Thank you very much for being our guest in our podcast. This is first English podcast I ever made. So, in advance, please apologize for my not perfect English. So the English is my not second, not third language even. So, but I promised I will do my best. So, Mr. Elias Gerasolis, I introduced you already to our listeners. And can you tell us about yourself, just briefly, about your background, how you can become a member of Livingston Group?
Well, thank you so much. I just want to start off by saying what a pleasure it is to be on here with you. I know you're very well-known media and online personality in the Armenian community. So I just want to say it's an honor to be here, including with the eminent Ambassador Papia. So I just want to start off by saying that I come from an interesting background. I was born and raised in New Jersey. My father's from Greece originally, and my mother's from China. So I come from a multicultural background, and in part because of my Greek roots, I've always had a sympathy for my Armenian brethren. After graduating from university, I then came to Washington, D.C., and I was a director of legislative affairs for 3 years at the American Hellenic Institute, which is one of the top Greek American advocacy organizations, where I advocated for stronger U.S.-Greece, U.S.-Cyprus relations. After that, my tenure there, I joined the Livingston Group, which is a well-known lobbying firm in Washington, D.C., founded by former Congressman Bob Livingston. I've been there for the past 2 years, and it's been an honor for both myself and my colleagues to formally represent the National Democratic Alliance here in Washington. During the past few months, it is a message that I think is a very positive one, a very constructive one, and one that we are very proud to be magnifying here with U.S. government decision makers.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Elias, so what really motivates you? I mean, first of all, thank you very much for your hard work. We had today already third hearing grace you about the Arthur situation. So basically, what motivates you to work with National Democratic Alliance Armenia?
Well, thank you for asking that question. I got involved with the National Democratic Alliance because I had relationships with some key NDA supporters. They explained to me the goals and aspirations of National Democratic Alliance, and there are ones that I personally agree with tremendously. And I think it's one, the message and the vision of NDA is, I think, something that'll be extremely beneficial both to the future of Armenia as well as for the United States. I think the message and the vision NDA has is a win-win for everyone. And so it's because I believe in the vision of NDA, that's why I feel so confident and bring that message here in Washington and to decision makers here in Washington at the highest levels. So it's really because I believe in NDA's message and I think and NDA's vision and something that I very much want to promote.
Thank you very much. Mr. Elias, what's your feeling about the situation? Already we had like third hearings, right, today?
Right.
And so we had like first hearings, it was maybe 3 or 4 months ago. right? What's your feeling about the procedure? I mean, do we have any progress, or do we just completely stagnation or nothing happening? What's your feeling like comparing the first hearing and third hearing already we had today?
I think it's showing that our efforts are bearing fruit. As you are aware, the NDA, in cooperation with the Livingston Group, played a key role in facilitating the 2 hearings in the House of Representatives with the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission. We have a very close working partnership with Congressman Chris Smith, and that really created a tremendous momentum in Congress. And the Senate decided to do its own Nagorno-Karabakh hearing, and I just came from that hearing. And if you listen to that hearing, the discussion is evolving. It's no longer just a discussion about the human rights, rather the humanitarian catastrophe in Nagorno-Karabakh. A major part of today's discussion in the Senate hearing was about how to decouple Armenia from Russia, the negative role of Russia, how there's an opportunity to align Armenia with the United States and bring it out of the Russian orbit. All things that NDA has talked about. So things are very much moving in NDA's direction. I just want to clarify, and I'm happy to elaborate more for your audience. The lobbying process is not an overnight procedure. There are thousands of people in Washington, D.C., in Congress, in the White House, in the State Department, in the National Security Council, in the think tank space that all have some level of influence. So it takes quite some time to develop a narrative. And so, what we're doing is not an overnight process. There is no such thing as overnight results. It's a process of constant lobbying, constant education, constant advocacy, and over time, you slowly build more and more momentum, right? And the steps you take can lead to, and over time, a significant change in policy. But this is not something that happens overnight, and something that's very important for your viewers to understand, because oftentimes in other countries, right, you have a different system of government. Whether it's in Armenia, whether it's in Greece, right, from where my ancestry is from, it's a very different system of government. In a parliamentary system, right, especially in countries like Armenia or even Greece, you have, let's say, the prime minister, the leader, he makes a statement and that's it, right? That's the policy. It doesn't work like that here in the United States. We have a much different system. We have 3 branches of government: executive, legislative, judiciary, and they all operate separately, and they all have, they're all able to influence things in a certain direction. So, for example, the president of the United States, the White House, might advocate for a certain policy, but then Congress could decide that it doesn't want that policy, and it could push for a different policy. So it's a much different dynamic here in the United States. And so I just want to provide that context for your audience. But overall, to answer your question, I think we're moving in a very positive direction. I think our efforts have generated quite a bit of fruit in what I would say is a relatively short period of time. And I'm very sanguine about the future in terms of what we can accomplish.
Thank you very much for your answer. Mr.
May I add a couple of words? First,
sure.
I would like to thank Mr. Kerasulis and to confirm that we are really satisfied of the results comparing this really short period. We met last year in Washington in Livingston Group. We have some preliminary talks and so on, but actually the cooperation began half a year ago. And already on June 21st, we had this first hearing in the Congress, then on September 6th. And based already what was done in Congress, Senate decided and went on with very important hearings here this time. Thanks to Livingston Group and personally, particularly to Mr. Elias Kerasulis, because we can feel that he is a high-level specialist. He can understand really all, let's say, strings in Washington, how to operate all this. It's experience, education, contacts, and many things. And hopefully we can see the more, let's say, feasible results in near future, especially for Armenia to become closer to United States, because National Democratic Alliance, the mainstream, let's say, direction for us is becoming an ally to the United States.
Right. And I just want to buttress what Ambassador Papian said, and I want to thank him for his kind words. It's really such a pleasure of us to work with someone who I think is a true modern day Armenian treasure, you know, not only as a political personality, but also someone who's a brilliant historian, political philosopher, and so forth. So it's really an honor for us to work with Ambassador Papian and other people who are very high caliber individuals. I think, going to what Ambassador Papian said, I think it'll be very useful for your audience if I could provide a little bit of a summary, if you will, of what exactly lobbying is, because you hear this word thrown around, and I think it'd be very educational for your audience if I were to provide a little bit of context. The NDA is really unique insofar as they're really the first, if you look at the records, the first Armenian interest group to ever really hire a lobbying firm in a long-term effort. The only time that I know of a public record of this being done previously was in 2020. The Armenian embassy hired a law firm connected to former Senator Bob Dole, but that was only for a 1-month period. It was more of a symbolic exercise. So NDA is really the first Armenian entity, if you will, to hire a professional lobbying firm. Now, I have to make a distinction between a lobbying firm, which is what we are, and community advocacy groups, which is something that probably your audience is more familiar with. But I have to make a distinction. And I'm someone who has the unique experience of both working at a community advocacy group and also working at a lobbying firm. So how are these things different? You know, so for example, when I was working at the American Hellenic Institute, that was a community activist group. It's funded by members of the local Greek American community in order to pursue a very specific mission, right? In this case, stronger U.S.-Greece, U.S.-Cyprus relations. So that is an advocacy group, right? You have grassroots members of the community that donate to an organization. The community tries to exercise influence that way. They try to have their members, for example, write letters to their congressmen, have constituents reach out, and so forth. It's more of a grassroots approach. That's completely different from a lobbying firm. In a lobbying firm, you have, similar to how if you were trying to litigate something through the legal process, you hire a law firm to navigate you through the legal process. People hire lobbying firms to help them navigate through the political process. So in the case of NDA, we help advocate for our client and help them navigate the political process. And in the case of lobbying firms, they're usually created by people who are former high-level government officials, whether it be former administration officials, former members of Congress. In my case, our firm was founded by former Congressman Bob Livingston, was in Congress for 22 years, served as chairman of the House Appropriations Committee, briefly served as a Speaker of the House designate. So in that situation, right, where you have people who understand the political process, who understand the nuances, and also have been around in Washington for a long time, you're able to give the client a better chance of their voice being heard. Because when you have, let's say, a former member of Congress reach out to people in Congress who they used to serve with and say, hey, I want to listen, I want you to listen to our case on behalf of National Democratic Alliance or any other cause, it's going to be taken much more seriously because they're being approached by someone who they know, who they've served with, who they've worked with. Now, it doesn't guarantee that the member or the government official will do what we're asking them for, but we're in a position where we can put our best case forward and we could try to make the most persuasive argument possible on behalf of our client, in this case, the NDA. And so the lobbying firms really provide expertise, provide a certain level of insider access, and provide a different approach. I'm not saying, one is better than the other. In fact, I think both community advocacy groups and professional lobbying firms are needed and should be utilized for what we believe in. But I just thought it was important for me to help educate the audience about what these distinctions are, because oftentimes you hear a lot of terms thrown around: Armenian lobby, Greek lobby. But it's important for your audience to understand that there are distinctions within this realm. So I just thought I provide that context, and I hope that's helpful for you and your audience.
Thank you very much for clarification. Armenia is a huge diaspora everywhere, around the world. And many people, might be surprised, and how come it happened last 1 year? So before, they accumulate a lot of money, a lot of budgets, for lobbying. And now, in fact, there's less than 1 year, and thanks to NDA, National Democratic Exit, you start this process. So what was before? Because I know many Armenians around the world, they will tell you, oh, this is not true. We give money, we donate money for lobbying, for Armenian interest. What happens then? Do you have any idea, or you, Mr. Papian, is there any answer on that?
Well, that's exactly my point. I think the problem is a lot of the people you talk to who say, oh, we're donating money for Armenian lobbying and this and that, there isn't an understanding, it seems, between the distinction between advocacy groups and lobbying firms. These are two completely different things. And in fact, my former boss, the president of the American Hellenic Institute, always liked to say, we are not the Greek lobby. The Greek lobby is when the Greek government hires a lobbying firm. We are a Greek American advocacy group. There's a very important distinction there. So these people you talk to, they probably, I don't know what they were doing. I assumed they were donating to Armenian American community organizations. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's important that the Armenian American community have strong organizations, and I'm all for that. Okay, I just want to make that very clear. It's very important that we have strong Armenian American community organizations. But I think the challenge, and I've noticed this, and perhaps Ambassador Papian could elaborate, because again, I can't speak authoritatively on the dynamics within the Armenian American community, is that there doesn't seem to be an understanding of the distinction between lobbying firms and community activist groups, and the fact that both should be utilized. I can tell you, and I think this might be one of the differences, frankly, between the Greek American community and the Armenian American community, is that in the Greek American community, there's always been a very good understanding of what lobbying firms are, what public relations firms are. And in fact, major community leaders, including the heads of the Greek American advocacy groups, have always said that in addition to the existing Greek American community organizations, professional lobbying firms should be hired. So that's always been a position of the Greek American community, that yes, we have our own organizations and they're very important, but we should also utilize professional lobbying firms here in Washington. And that's always been a very strong position. And that's something, frankly, Turkey and Azerbaijan has always done very well throughout the years, hiring various lobbying and public relations firms. Why that's not done in the Armenian American community or the Armenian community is not something I can speak to. I'm not qualified to speak about that. But I hope I have provided some clarification in terms of the distinction between professional lobbying firms and community organizations. And again, I just want to make it very clear. I'm not saying one is better than the other. They're both two very distinct things. And I think both should be utilized and they both play a role. Ambassador Papian, perhaps you have some thoughts on this topic?
Yes. First of all, I'd like to say I totally agree with Mr. Gerasoulis, the explanation, and add a couple of words, because there is also a big distinction in the goals, objectives that are put, because Armenian American community always was advocating for genocide recognition, genocide teaching, and so on. We see that the most important part for Armenia is the statehood, Armenian independent state, safety, security, independence, closer relations with the United States. It's no secret that even Armenians who live in America often rely on Russia, and they see Russia as a savior, Russia as the only way and only ally that Armenia must to be. This is big difference. They do not understand the reality, 21st century reality in Armenia. Many of these groups, unfortunately, they remained a century ago, or at least mid 20th century. They see their goals as promoting something anti-Turkish. We see our goal something pro-Armenian US, because all these, let's say, relations that hopefully will come in future will solve all issues and problems with Turkey and in the past. This is important because the really independent, strong state is the basis for all national aspirations to implement them. Otherwise, we will have just some symbolic victories, but not victories in real life. And we think that going through or adding also to that efforts real lobbying groups, it will double or triple our possibilities and the outcome.
Right. And just to add to Ambassador Papian's point, I've always had a lot of interaction with and familiarity with the Armenian American community because of my role as Director of Legislative Affairs at the premier Greek American Advocacy Organization. And behind closed doors, one of the conversations that other Greek American community leaders and I have had that's always been very strange to us was how come the Armenian American community, as their top and only, and what it seemed to be their only priority, is genocide recognition. Now, the Greeks have also been subject to genocide by Turkey. We've also been victims of the genocide of Turkey. Okay, let me make this clear, and it's something that should be called out as genocide. Okay, and when the genocide recognition came about in 2019, I was very strongly in support of it. I lobbied for it. So let's make this very clear. That being said, genocide recognition has never been a top priority of the Greek American advocacy efforts. In fact, I would say it's not even within the top tier. It's probably, we would have it in the bottom tier of issues. We never considered it an important issue. The most important issues that we were advocating for were, number one, the U.S.-Greece military relationship, upgraded geostrategic relations with Cyprus, energy exploration in the Eastern Mediterranean. Our focus is really geopolitical. How can we have more U.S. military bases in Greece, for example? At the American Hellenic Institute, we collaborated, or we interacted very closely with the Greek military. So we were really focused on geopolitical issues of the here and the now. What can we do today to increase U.S.-Greece relations, increase U.S.-Cyprus relations? Because from our perspective, the closer the relationship between the United States, the closer the relationship between the United States and Cyprus, the less reliant the United States is on Turkey and less leverage Turkey has. So from our perspective, we always found it very strange that it seemed like most of the focus seemed to be on historic issues and rather than strategic issues. You know, it's something that, you know, privately we would find very strange, if I'm being frank with you, since Ambassador Papian brought up this point.
That's true. That's totally true. And Mr. Elias, what do you think? What was the impact of the last provocation? Like, you might know, like a couple days ago, before like 30 hearings, a truck crossed the border, like from Azerbaijan through Agdam to Stepanakert. In fact, the truck is still there. The guards saving it. Nothing happens with the truck. It wasn't like help to people. I mean, it was just truck past the border. I mean, no one knows even what's in, really, because it's not unpacked yet. So what do you think? What was the impact of this event on this hearing and in general situation, like blockade situation in Artsakh?
Right. I think it definitely had an impact. And in fact, we've heard statements from Senator Menendez alluding to this in terms of expressing concern about an Azerbaijani military buildup. So I think Azerbaijan, by being aggressive, by being provocative, by engaging in a military setup, I think they are only undermining themselves. Because Azerbaijan says, oh, well, we want to have a so-called peace plan with Armenia. You completely discredit yourself if you're engaging in a blockade in Nagorno-Karabakh. If you're engaging in military buildup, you're creating a situation where you're making it impossible for everyone. So I think the Azerbaijan is really undermined itself. I think they've overplayed their hand, and I think that's why you heard Senator Menendez make those comments that he made, expressing concern about this most recent buildup. So it's something that members of Congress are paying attention to. It's something that they're looking at, and it's something that we're going to monitor very closely. And also to just piggyback off of Ambassador Popian's point about the positive use of the positive partnership that the Livingston Group has with NDA. I'm hoping that also through our partnership, through our efforts, and with the work we have done and the work we're going to do in the future, I hope it also starts conversations both in Armenia and in the Armenian American community in terms of people starting to think of, hey, what is NDA doing? What is this lobbying firm they're using? What are lobbying firms? What are public relations firms? What are these things going on in DC? And I hope it could create a conversation with the Armenian American community in terms of, well, maybe in addition to the approaches that we have, and will continue to have, maybe we should also, parallel to that, pursue additional tracks as well, pursue additional options as well to further strengthen our influence. Because again, as I've said, I think one of the things that I've noticed is that in the Greek American community, even though we have our community organizations, the top Greek American leaders have always talked about using professional lobbying firms, using public relations firms. The attitude, at least, again, I can't speak for all Greeks, but I think that generally the attitude of the Greek American community is, if Turkey and Azerbaijan is, or let's say in the case of Turkey, is spending millions of dollars on lobbying firms in DC, we should have more lobbying firms than they do and do a better job than them. You see what I mean? Let's play the game and do it at an even higher level. The sense I get, and again, I don't know what the dynamics are, the sense I've gone from reading different articles in Armenian American newspapers, it's almost the opposite way of thinking. It almost seems like there's the attitude of, well, if our enemies are lobbying in Washington, D.C., if they're using lobbying firms, it means lobbying firms are somehow immoral and we shouldn't use any lobbying firms. I've seen articles like that in Armenian American newspapers. So I don't know what the thinking is. Again, I'm not involved in the Armenian.
I know, Mr. Yosef.
Maybe you could explain it to me.
All these articles, like newspapers, like under control of the KGB. Anything good for us, good for a state, good for Armenia, it's bad for them. So they can write, they can just spread the information any kind of they want. Sorry for interrupting.
Okay, well, thank you. I wasn't aware of that. That's why it's good
Yes.
for people like you who could provide insights. But I'm hoping, though, with the work we're doing, it could create some new thinking in the Armenian community and the Armenian American community in terms of maybe there are different approaches and additional approaches we could use in Washington, D.C. Again, as I've said, it's important that every community, whether the Greek American community or the Armenian American community, it's important to have those community organizations. They should be strong, but also that should not preclude the use of professional resources. So that's just the point I want to make.
Mr. Papian, what do you think? What was the impact?
Yeah, there is a big difference between Greek communities and Armenian communities because Armenia was part of Soviet Union, and Soviets viewed to the communities as an instrument in their hands to influence the countries where they located. I mean, American Armenian community, French Armenian community in this way. Greece was part of West, part of NATO, so there were no influence of, let's say, KGB or some other organizations. And they infiltrated into these organizations, not only in Armenia, because people think that KGB efforts were only in Armenia. No, they consider Armenian communities as a big opportunity for them, as a, let's say, possibility for influence, as information gathering and so on, which means there is some kind of continuation of this thinking. You are right. We are going more and more to have dialogues with communities to explain them. Each year I was coming to the United States, having a lot of meetings with Armenian communities in many cities, beginning from east and going to west, explaining our goals. I myself, I'm very involved, and you know about this political history, Woodrow Wilson, our claims and so on. But I consider this as a possibility, as an instrument to reach something, some kind of concessions. And even here, when we looked what was doing, Armenian community was lobbying first in 1920s up to 1960s for Armenian rights, the territorial rights, property rights, and so on. And from mid-60s, and I know for sure there was a party decision in Politburo, in head office of Communist Party, that they have to shift the focus of Armenian community from real goals, I mean, from claims, into symbolic claims, which was the recognition and discussion of, let's say, genocide issue. I always was for the recognition. I put a lot of efforts in Canada, and during my turn, it was recognized and so on. But for me, it's not the main goal. It's an instrument. It's a tool to reach the other goals. Unfortunately, this distinction is not so clear for many our members of communities. But what we can see now, because we have in Armenia in this square of liberty 24-hour presence, and we see that a lot of people are coming from many countries. Just today I met a guy who came from Boston. I met a woman who came from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, and they are specially coming to join us, National Democratic Alliance. It's very interesting, and they see us as a new opportunity, as something, a new fresh air in this political life of Armenia and Armenians. And we are hopeful that very soon, really very soon, we can make big changes first in the minds, it is going on, in the minds of our people, and then in the actions. We can see that more and more people share our views, values, and more people are becoming active, following us, supporting us, going together with us. Yes.
Mr. Elias, so when we started like cooperation with you, like it's Armenian, because Mr. Arpapian and our team and you, it was like 1 year ago approximately, but many things changed during this 1 year. And what do you think is the like major changes what's going on now in the war? They're like for benefiting like our process.
Right. Oh, that's a very good question. And I think it's a very nuanced question as well. On one hand, the situation is very severe, and we don't wish for this situation, right? You have Armenia, who's, if we're being honest, is on the verge of catastrophe. You have a humanitarian crisis in Nagorno-Karabakh. You have starvation. You have buildup along the border. I don't think there's ever been a situation where Armenia has been more vulnerable. So, in that sense, it's very unfortunate. I do think, though, that because of what happened in 2020 Nagorno-Karabakh war, in terms of the developments that have happened, I think the brutality of the situation and the horror of the situation have opened up people's eyes in Armenia. And I think Ambassador Papian could speak about this more authoritatively than I can. For example, if you look at polling from the International Republican Institute, the popularity rating of Russia amongst the Armenian population, I'm not talking about the government, I'm saying the population, went from over 90% in 2018 to now it's less than 50%. And I think it's going down even further. And I'm sure those numbers, and from what I understand, the numbers in Nagorno-Karabakh and Artsakh are even more stark because people saw firsthand the Russian betrayal. So I think the severity of the situation, as bad as it is, has opened up the eyes of many people, has made, I think, because of the desperation of the situation, has led to a rethinking of all paradigms in Armenia and has created, I think, an opening for this new approach that NDA is advocating for. And what we're trying to communicate here to our interlocutors in Washington is if you want, let's say, an Armenia that's peaceful, that's stable, that's aligned with the West, that's decoupled from Russia, or to use the term of NDA, deoccupied from Russia, NDA is the instrument to achieve this. And so I think we've been able to put into the minds of policymakers that NDA is an option and a very appropriate option for the United States. And I think this is very important because you've had propagandists in Russia that have called for the Armenian government to arrest the NDA. We've seen the police brutality in Armenia against protesters. So it's very important that people in Washington have close ties with NDA, and I think that will make the Armenian government think twice in terms of any retaliatory actions against NDA. So I hope I answered your question. Ambassador Papian, do you have any additional thoughts?
Mr. Papian.
No, thanks. I think anyway that I already mentioned that we can feel the changes because, and using your word, people are opening their eyes. One of our mission is to provide the real story, the truth about what happened, because Armenia and Armenians always were told that they have only two choices, Turkey and Russia. And when we speak, and as they say, against Russia, they say, okay, if they're against Russia, this means that you are for Turkey. But we are telling them the world has been changed. In 21st century, you do not need to have a border with a country to receive a support. Even Pashinyan was speaking in one of his latest interviews that, okay, our neighboring countries are Russia, Iran, and Turkey, and the choice is between them. No, the choice can be West. The choice can be the United States. And the United States, we have seen that can support far away countries. Let's say when Taiwan is much further than Armenia, especially the United States and Armenia has very close relations, especially during World War I. And when I have some special programs telling about Armenian orphanages paid by US taxpayers, their support, this nearest relief, Woodrow Wilson Arbitral Award, and many, many things, Armenian people are surprised because they never were taught in Armenian schools. First, between World War I and World War II, the main arch-enemy of the Soviet Union was the Great Britain, and the propaganda was anti-British. After beginning Cold War, the main enemy for the Soviet Union was the United States. And because of this, everything was forbidden, something to say positive about the United States, and everything was negatively shown. And this is very important to show the truth, especially. And today I already twice watched the Senate discussions, hearings there, and I can say that our values and interests with the United States are very common. Let's say when Senator Murphy said, what the difference? We reject to buy from one dictator, Putin, oil and gas, and we are buying from another dictator, Aliyev. What the difference? We can feel that this is the country that we can cooperate with. I'm not naive to say that everyone in the United States put these values over everything. No, but we know that in the United States, the structure is that way, that we can influence through some groups and through the real life, saying and human life is the highest value for, let's say, many people in Senate, in State Department. When we campaign to Russia, Russia on the paper until now is our main ally. But we haven't heard even one senator or Duma member speaking, telling that people are dying there. They are starving there. Nothing. In opposite, they just after when this Pashinyan gave this interview to Rada Republika, they began speaking against Armenians in that way that Armenians are their first enemy. And I would like to underline one very interesting answer given by Ambassador Kim when she was asked, is these changes, I mean, the approach of Armenian government towards West, is this permanent or this for short term? And the answer was really very smart. It's too early to say what. And this is very important because what is trying to do Pashinyan, he thinks that politicians in the United States are as naive as some Armenian villagers there and can change their attitudes towards him by one interview or by 2 words. No. Everybody understands that because Putin and Russia do not care about Pashinyan anymore, he wants to show West that I am now ready to cooperate with you. But Pashinyan, as an opportunist politician, he never can be trusted. And I am really happy that Ambassador Kim mentioned that it's too early to answer to that. Even I'm sure that if she will watch the next day interview to Armenian public TV, where Pashinyan was speaking very pro-Russian and telling that even his wife's visit to Kiev, it's nothing political, it's just humanitarian and so on.
Right. And just to go to Ambassador Popion's point, certain things we do are public, but certain activities we engage in are private because sensitivity is involved. And you and your audience should be assured that we've taken the NDA message to the very highest levels of the U.S. government, both in Congress and the administration. And what I could say is in some of our meetings, the officials or the individuals we've met with showed that they were aware that Pashinyan could not be trusted, that he says one thing, does another. So as Ambassador Papian said, these U.S. officials are very sophisticated. These are not naive people who you can dupe. So I just wanted to affirm what Ambassador Papian has said. Again, I can't go into too many specifics, but many people see through the game he's playing.
Absolutely. When I heard like NDA cooperating with a firm like Livingston Group, you know, and I was surprised. I never thought that any non-governmental organization can hire like the group, like Livingston Group for help, but it happens. Now, as a result, we have like third hearings about the Artsakh situation in the Congress, which is phenomenal. And what do you think? Would it more beneficial and easier for you if instead of NDA, this you know, the event will come from the state?
Yes. Yes, you hit the nail on the head.
Initiative will come from the state, not from the non-governmental. Like,
yes,
will be like easier for you that?
Yes, most countries. The way it works is most countries in Washington, D.C. Hire lobbying firms like the Livingston Group, and those lobbying firms would then work with the embassy in Washington and with the ambassador and lobby on behalf of the country. And if you look at the records, most countries have hired or currently have lobbyists in Washington. In fact, even as I've said, because of the advocacy of the Greek American community here, at different times, even the Greek and Cyprus governments have hired big lobbying firms here in Washington. The Armenian government is one of the few governments that has never really hired a lobbying firm, with the exception of that the 1-month agreement I mentioned with Bob Goldwasser. So this is actually something that's extremely common. Most foreign governments have lobbying firms in DC that work with the embassy, and they do this because they understand that this is a good investment, that it's important that they have high-level access in Washington, that they have influence in Washington, and whatever they're spending on lobbyists in Washington, the benefits they get are 1,000 times of whatever they're investing. So this is something the Armenian government absolutely should be doing. Let me put it this way. If the Armenian government had used lobbying firms for the past 30 years, I think the situation would be completely different.
Absolutely.
And you know, sometimes, you know, it's really not a question of money also, because some of the poorest countries in the world have spent millions of dollars on lobbying firms in DC. So whenever people say, well, Armenia can't do it because there's no money, that's a complete excuse. Let me put it this way. If the Armenian government can spend $6 million for a Snoop Dogg concert, they could spend $1 or $2 million on some proper lobbying firms here in Washington. So I'll just leave it like that. But if the Armenian government has had lobbyists for the past 30 years, if they did that, I believe the situation would be very, very different. And we would have a different situation, but it absolutely should be what the Armenian government should be doing. And I'm hopeful that NDA, once it's in power and in charge of the Armenian government, will take this new approach. And again, also, I think there's probably, and you and Ambassador Papian could probably affirm this, there was probably a thinking in the mind of the government of, well, we don't need to do lobbying in Washington because we have a large diaspora. Let's just outsource the advocacy to the diaspora. That probably, again, I don't know what the thinking was. I think that might have been a reason. And look, I think it's important that any government, whether it's the Armenian government or any other government, works with the diaspora and tries to collaborate where there are areas of common interest. But collaborating with your diaspora is not the same thing as abdicating your responsibilities. It's your responsibility as a foreign government to have a proper operation and a professional operation in Washington, D.C. period, end of statement. And there are no excuses not to have them, especially for a country like Armenia with all the enemies you're surrounded by and in the territory you're in. So this is something that the Armenian government should have been doing for the past 30 years. It's very unfortunate that they have not done that, but it's good that NDA has already started this process in its capacity as a political party, and I'm hopeful when NDA comes to power that they will take a very different approach in terms of how Armenia operates in Washington, D.C. Ambassador Papian, you have anything to say?
Mr. Papian?
Hopefully we'll come to power soon, and we'll go on with lobbying your group and other opportunities, because myself, I as being an ambassador in Canada, that there is a relatively big Armenian community there. They supported our embassy and so on. But you see, speaking about American Armenian community and lobbying, it's one of the problems was that the parties who were and are controlling these main advocacy groups, they always were advising Armenian government not to hire professional lobbyists, saying we have there, and in this way they were keeping their leverage over the Armenian government. Why some parties became part of coalition? Because of their influence on communities and on these advocacy groups. Otherwise, the government could survive without any coalition. I mean, this was some kind of group interest that was overweight than, let's say, the state goals.
You know, what Ambassador Papian said is very interesting, and I didn't know, you know, what he said, I wasn't aware of, that the Armenian advocacy groups here in the United States told the Armenian government, told the Armenian embassy not to hire lobbying firms. I did not know that. And I find that so interesting, because in the Greek American community, it's exactly the opposite, as I've noted before. The Greek American advocacy leaders in Washington, D.C. And in the United States have not just privately, but have publicly stated on multiple occasions that the Greek and Cyprus governments need to hire their own lobbying firms. And they've been very vocal about this. So it's interesting how it's exactly the opposite, where the advocacy groups, Armenian advocacy groups, tell the Armenian government not to hire lobbying firms, but the Greek advocacy groups here in the United States have always pushed the Greek government to hire lobbying firms. So I find that to be a very interesting difference. I didn't know that. Thank you for telling me that.
When the first information went out that we're having negotiations with your group to having a lobbyist group, to hire a lobbyist group, Armenian, these advocacy groups, they began a campaign against your group, yourselves, against us, going back to 2008. And so why? Because you see, the understanding was that if there is a competitor, the donations will not be given to the advocacy groups. This is an issue of money, because when you are alone and you are saying to the community that, you see, I'm so successful, I'm supporting national goals, supporting Armenia, and they were receiving big donations. It's not millions and millions of dollars per year. It's not thousands of millions. And there has some kind of fear that if people will see, the government will see that it's possible to do with the same money, even less money with lobbyist group to have more results, they will not support, and let's say the community will not support these advocacy groups. And we have passed this. But this is the normal way. I agree with you that Armenia has to have lobbyist groups and advocacy groups. They have to cooperate, but the main political goals must be promoted by lobbyist groups, because professionals always are better than non-professionals, let's say, in this way.
I agree with that, but I find it very ironic because Ambassador, I've read articles again in these Armenian American newspapers saying, and I'm kidding you not, you could read these articles, they're all public, that, well, the Armenian American community is more virtuous than the Turks because the Turks are hiring all these professionals. We use volunteers, so therefore we're more virtuous. And I almost fainted when I read some of these articles because you're basically saying that because I'm not using the resources that are available, therefore I'm better than the other side. I mean, which makes it's completely illogical. You're just depriving yourself of resources. And there seems to be almost a disconnect where, there seems to be concerns in the Armenian community of, well, Turkey's hiring all these lobbying firms. There seems to be almost like a lack of connection, if you will, in terms of people not realizing, the same lobbying firms that you're complaining that the Turks are hiring, you can also hire. A lobbying firm's like a law firm. If you pay them, they'll work for you. So there almost seems to be an assumption that, well, we can't hire lobbying firms. No, you can hire lobbying firms. If you don't like the fact that Turkey's hiring lobbying firms, you are more than allowed to hire lobbying firms. And, if you pay them, they'll happy to have you as your client. So there seems to be some sort of a disconnect, if you will, on that subject.
I believe this is not only issue of money, as Mr. Papian emphasized. This was the difference in the goals.
Right.
The main issue is the goal, what they pursued. They pursued recognition, what was dictated by KGB. So do nothing more than just simply stupid recognition. So what? And the goal, in our case, is completely different. This was make them be angry. And this podcast is actually, I think, gonna change some thoughts in minds of people when they will see this, like they were simply cheated. Like 100 years, they just gave the money away for nothing. And simply in 1 year, here we go, here are results.
Right. And this is the thing. I think part of the difficulty too is things like lobbying and state building are more conceptual concepts. It might be harder for, let's say, the average person to understand what is lobbying versus donating to a school or a hospital in Artsakh, right? But the point is, we have to think about this way. All the millions of dollars that were spent on these humanitarian things, donate a school, donate a hospital in Artsakh and all these things. Where has it gone? Azerbaijan enjoys it all now, right? All those millions of dollars that were spent on these hospitals and schools and this and that, it's now being controlled by Azerbaijan. So it's important that there are proper priorities, and a top priority needs to be, number one, proper state building, right? Having a strong Armenian government, having a strong military, having a strong state, but also, too, influence, perception management, communication. That's also just as important. In fact, I think Ambassador Papian said in one interview that communication or diplomacy is the first line of national defense. And the point to make, and the point that I've made to not just us, but I've also made to senior foreign government officials, is you need to view lobbying as just as important as buying a new missile or buying a new plane. It's absolutely critical, and it should be viewed as part of your national defense and the defense of your nation. So these are very important messages. Having good diplomats, having diplomats with experience here in Washington, D.C., and having a professional operation, I think will be very important for Armenia's future success.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Elias, what do you think? How Armenia is important for the U.S.?
I am glad you asked that question, and let me elaborate on many different things. Part of the reason one of the first questions you asked was, why am I involved in this? One of the motivating factors for me is that Greece, even though it had certain advantages, it was not, under the Soviet orbit. It was saved under the Truman Doctrine. It's part of the EU, part of NATO. But I feel sympathy to the Armenian cause because as Greeks, we've dealt with many similar issues. And I think Greece is a success model for what Armenia could be, because you know, a lot of the people on the other side who are pro-Russian, you know, always put out this false propaganda of, you know, Armenia doesn't have a future with the West. You know, why would the United States ever support Armenia? Armenia is not important enough. We're not important enough. All this is complete garbage. And I think the case study we could use is Greece. You know, Greece did not always have close relations with the United States. Back in the 1980s, when you had a socialist government in Greece, there was a certain amount of anti-Americanism. Greece was very close with Russia at the time, also very involved with the Palestinian cause. And, you know, especially at that time, and even today, although it's a minority now, you've always had a certain Russophilia in Greece, where, you know, you would have people who would say, well, the Russians are Orthodox Christian brothers. We're the same culture, and therefore they're going to save us. They're going to save us, and they're going to save Cyprus. Now, the thing that I would say to my Russophile Greek friends is that's a bunch of baloney. The Russians, it's not in their self-interest to do anything to help Greece and Cyprus, right? Because if you have tensions between Greece and Turkey, that destabilizes NATO's southern flank, that fractures the EU. If you have an ongoing Cyprus problem, right, of Turkish troops in Cyprus, that divides NATO, divides the European Union. Russia benefits from that. Russia has no incentive to help Greece or Cyprus. It's not in their self-interest. But for a long time, the Russians were always promoting this anti-American propaganda in Greece. We're going to save you. America doesn't care about you. America loves Turkey. So the same propaganda they tried to use in Greece, I see them trying to do the same thing in Armenia, promoting these lies. But you see a situation in both Greece and Cyprus now where the United States government overall does not trust Erdogan. They see him for what he is. They see that he's an Islamist, that he's a dictator, and that he can't be trusted to project our interests in that region, which goes back to the Cold War. Turkey was useful to the United States in the Cold War. But now we're past that, and because Turkey's unreliable, the United States is looking for new allies in the region. And the United States has significantly increased its relationship with both Greece and Cyprus. You now have multiple U.S. military bases and locations in Greece, not just the traditional base in Suda Bay, which has been there since the late 1960s, but in other places. So, for example, you have the port of Alexandroupolis, which is a new U.S. location, which is exceptionally important. In fact, most of the weapons to Ukraine are transited through the port of Alexandroupolis in northern Greece, and then into the Baltics, and then into Ukraine. And by doing that, the United States no longer has to go through the Bosphorus and Dardanelles Straits, the Turkish Straits. So basically, with its partnership with both Greece and Cyprus, the United States has found an alternative to Turkey when it comes to projecting its interests in both the Black Sea region as well as the Eastern Mediterranean, because you also have U.S. military bases in Romania, for example. So given the combination of Greece, Cyprus, and other allied countries like Romania, you really don't need the Turks. The United States doesn't really need the Turks anymore in terms of U.S. military bases in the Eastern Mediterranean, in North Africa, in the Black Sea. It has alternative partners that it could use now, and really doesn't need Turkey in that respect. Where the United States does still need Turkey is projection into the Middle East, whether it's vis-a-vis the Iranians and other countries in the Middle East. Now, if you have Armenia that becomes an ally and partner of the United States with a military relationship with the United States, then frankly, the United States really doesn't need Turkey in any respects, because Armenia could help the United States project its influence in the Middle East. So between Greece, Cyprus, and Armenia, you basically would then have a replacement of Turkey. That's not to say Turkey won't be an important country. It's a country of 80 million people, second largest army in NATO. It'll always be a country of relevance. But the United States would love it if they could extend what they've done with Greece and Cyprus into the Caucasus. they'll love nothing more than to have additional partners. So Armenia, in that respect, is incredibly important. And I think Armenians need to start to learn to appreciate their own geostrategic importance. And I don't think they've been able to, because you've had so much of this Russian propaganda of the Americans don't care about you, Armenia is an unimportant country, this kind of self-defeating, self-sabotaging, self-hating message that's been promoted. I think it's made it difficult for people to see the bigger picture. But Armenia has a tremendous opportunity to be at the core of the United States' new security architecture in the Middle East, in the Eastern Mediterranean, and in the Caucasus. It just needs a proper government, hopefully led by NDA, that can seize the moment and opportunity. And if that happens, Armenia will have security guarantees. Armenia will have all sorts of economic benefits. I mean, and again, this is not hypothetical. I'm not just making this up. Look at Greece. Greece, a couple of years ago, financial crisis, edge of bankruptcy. Now Greece is getting billions of dollars from US companies. It's getting aid from the United States government, getting support from the US government. It's getting support from various allies it's cultivated in the region, whether it's the Israelis, the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, Egypt. So
and military support.
Greece has become a superpower. And in fact, Greece no longer needs the pennies of the diaspora. They're getting so many billions of dollars now because of this new foreign policy alliance with the United States and regional countries, that they are no longer asking Greek Americans to donate to hospitals or these things because they're getting so much money. So if Armenia had a proper foreign policy, the Armenian government wouldn't need to ask the diaspora to donate to a hospital or school or anything like that. It would have billions of dollars of foreign investment. And again, Armenia is not just important for the US, it's important for the French. The French would love to have a influence in that region, and the Gulf states, the Saudis, other countries. So again, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go into an overly long-winded answer, but I think there's a tremendous opportunity for all of us if we can seize it. So I hope that gives you, that answers your question. And I don't know if Ambassador Papian wants to add anything to what I said.
Mr. Papian?
Yes, my prediction is that in near future, what we will see, and already the process is going on, that the role of Turkey will be shared between several countries. Mr. Kerasoulis already mentioned that the role of Greece was increased in the last years as economic and military base for the United States. This is, and as I know that the offers, the south flank chief of staff was moved from Izmir, Smyrna to Larissa into Greece. And the main shift will happen after the end of the war in Ukraine. Ukraine will replace Turkey as the main to contain, as the main country to contain Russia. The role was given during Cold War to Turkey, but Turkey, first of all, now became an ally to Russia, and instead of containing Russia, is supporting Russia. We know that all these microchips and others goes into Russia through Turkey, and Azerbaijan and Turkey reselling Russian gas and oil. And Ukraine will not be a member of NATO, at least for a decade, but it will be supported by NATO countries as the main country to counterbalance Russia. But there is another role that that Turkey has. This is the influence in Middle East. And I see that if Armenia and Georgia will have new policy becoming closer to the United States, they can have this, their share in this role. As because Armenia, we now Russians speak about Armenia as a Caucasian country, but Armenia historically was part of Middle East, and Armenians are known in Middle East countries. They are well respected. They have this influence. So Georgia and Armenia can assume some role of NATO or United States power projection in Middle East through Armenia. And also I see a role, a mission for Armenia to become a center for stateless people of the Middle East. Because when we look to the map, political map, we usually see the countries. But within these countries, there are huge ethnic, religious group. They are totally different. Let's say, speaking about 80 million of Turkish population, who have there some maybe 20 million Kurds, who have Zaza Kurds, who has these Alevis. In Iraq, we have Yazidis, so on. It's very important to work with stateless people in the Middle East, and Armenia can assume this role for the West. I do repeat, because Armenians are well known to these people. Armenians are not seen as foreigners. Even for centuries in the Middle East, in these countries, when for them a Christian and Armenian was the same, always the same word, because for them, mainly Armenians were living among them. This is important. Armenia is part of West, but meanwhile, as a local, let's say, guy of next door that can work with them, because I'm sure that in near future there will be a lot of also geopolitical changes in Middle East. It's not the case that the countries and the borders will remain untouched. There will be big changes, and here Armenia can have her role. Yeah.
And Mr. Elias, I would suggest to tell your friends, Greek friends, like Russophiles, that if they think Greek and Russians close friends, like close to the religion, that Ukrainians were more close. It didn't stop to murder them. So
exactly,
for Russians, it did not make ever any sense.
Right. Fortunately for us, the Russians lost the propaganda battle. Greece is a close ally of the United States. You have all these military bases there now, which I had always advocated for. But you still have a small minority of Russophiles in Greece. It's a minority now, but they're still there. But I think they've lost in Greece. So let's hope that they lose in Armenia, because they've done, I feel like, because of the fact that, you know, Armenia was the Soviet colony, you know, you've had 70 years of this Soviet propaganda. I think it's a little bit more of a difficult climb. And it's unfortunate because...
Sorry, and until now we have 24 hours, 3-4 Russian channels with propaganda, and the only or mainly foreign language that Armenians speak is Russian, and they cannot mainly watch US or European news broadcastings, and they view to the world through Russian propaganda,
right,
because of the language and TV channels.
Right, yeah, and I think it's really a psychological war they're engaged in, from what I've seen, because if you've seen the pro-Russian parties in Armenia and these people who follow the pro-Russian line, the rhetoric they use is very self-hating, very self-defeating, very self-sabotaging. You know, rhetoric like, we're not important enough for the United States, we don't matter, we are insignificant, therefore we must throw ourselves at the feet of the Russians because we're so unimportant. So it's almost, the Russians are promoting a message of self-hatred and trying to get Armenians to internalize that message of self-hatred. So it's very insidious, and I hope with NDA's efforts, it can help Armenia overcome this really, I consider it psychological warfare on the Armenian people. And I'm very sympathetic to us because the Russians try to do the same thing with the Greeks. You know, so the Russians are very dangerous. They're very tricky. They're very seductive, and we have to fight their psychological manipulation.
But the good news is that I put a poll on my YouTube channel, like which countries are the most dangerous to Armenia, like first enemies, like Turkey, Azerbaijan, and Russia, or three of them together. So 89% of voters, 89, put it 3 of them together as alliance, the enemy of Armenia. 89, and about was more than 9,000 voters. So things are changing and changing are very drastically. So the tools that were worked before, now they not valid days. So thank you very much, Mr. Elias. Thank you very much, Mr. Papian. And for a conclusion, what do you want to bring? What do you have any words to tell?
I just wanted to say that I've enjoyed immensely my working partnership with NDA. I consider it not only a professional relationship, but a personal friendship. I've had the opportunity to meet many amazing people through NDA, including Colonel Durar Safilian when he came here to Washington, Ambassador Papian, US NDA supporters. I have to say, in every interaction I've had, I've been extraordinarily impressed with both the NDA leaders and NDA supporters whom I've met. I think this is truly a very eminent group of people. And I found my experience working with NDA both exhilarating and highly enriching. And I think NDA should give people hope because they are providing a true alternative for the vision of Armenia. And I will do everything I can to support NDA in this process. So I think NDA is a party of hope. And I think I hope that people in Armenia, as well as of course our decision makers here in Washington, learn more and more about NDA and see that NDA's message and its vision and its plans for Armenia are a righteous one. So I just want to thank you for this opportunity to participate on your program. It's a great honor for me and very much an honor to be here with Ambassador Papian. Mr. Ambassador?
I would like once more time to thank Mr. Gerasulis and the Livingstone Group for the cooperation and use his description of NDA as party of hope. Really, I heard a lot of times from local Armenians saying, now we see you as the only hope for us, because people do understand that you cannot repeat the same steps and get other results. NDA is showing new ways out of this crisis and giving hope. And they do see how the world is changing. When you explain them that what has been changed, as you mentioned, that Armenia is important. Yes, Armenia is a small country, even a tiny country, but Armenia has its role. And for the big powers, they need the world to be together. I'm taking always and showing them the example that they were grateful for us to us when we sent with them 30 people from our army into Afghanistan as peacekeeper. What is 30? It's nothing. It was easy for them to find in their huge army some 50 or 500 more. But it's very important to have that you are in a coalition, you have friends, you are in alliance, and our Armenia can be part of this, especially because yes, we do share the value of West. I was talking to a Russian guy just a couple of days saying, you see, we were in the same country with you 200 years. It's beginning from 1828. But we were with Spain, with Greece, with France in Roman Empire for 700 years. I mean, we were part of that Western European society, which based on these values. And because, especially with Greece, I mean, it was before BC, it was after when it was Byzantium. So we were neighbors. We share a lot of values, lot of history, Black Pages history as well. But we hope, and I'm sure that we'll share also really a nice future in cooperation with European countries, with NATO countries, and we can get out of this crisis. And when I say we, I mean Artsakh as well with Armenia. Thank you, everyone.
I want to thank you guys, both Mr. Gerosulos, Mr. Papian. So whatever you do is perfect. No one could even imagine 1 year ago, like in last September, when the war started in Armenia, like again, and that after that we can have this hope and these changes in our region. So I believe your cooperation will bring more result and very soon. So thank you again. I believe our podcast will see not only our friends, only our enemies. So for our enemies, guys, you have a short time. Just pack your baggages and just disappear if you can. You have very short time, because we will win anyway. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Bye.
much.